Welcome to Wednesday Live with Evie. This is number 59, and the topic is every time you're annoyed, focus on this. So today you'll notice you're looking at me from a different angle. So I would love to know what you think of this angle. Am I back too far? What do you think of the background? Do you prefer the other angle better? Let me know. I'd be interested to hear your comments on it. And also just say hi in the comments if you want to do that. Just let me know that you're here, whether you're live or on the recording. And let me know what you tend to focus on when you are annoyed. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Evie Burke, and I work with, sorry, I'm just trying to get my windows here situated so I can see comments. But my name is Evie Burke, and I work with women entrepreneurs, and I help them take their productivity to a new level so that at the end of the day, they can just fully be present and enjoy the people that they spend their off hours with. So they don't have to worry about, oh, what didn't I get done today? Or what do I need to do tomorrow? They have it under control. They know what's going on. They know what they need to be doing, and they know that they're on track to meet their goals. So before we start, I want you to make two lists. And these are just for yourself. I'm not going to ask you to share them. You don't need to share them with anyone. But the first list is 3 people that really annoy or bother you. 3 people that you just kind of roll your eyes when they're talking, whether it's, in your head or actually rolling your eyes. 3 people that, just kind of get under your skin a little bit. Who are those 3 people for you? Write them down on a piece of paper for yourself. You don't need to share them. And then the other list is 3 people who you really admire. Who are 3 people that you just are excited to be in the room with them? You're excited anytime you get to talk to them. The people that you just kind of want to be them when you grow up. Who are those people? And list them out. And so today's topic is being annoyed, and there's a lot you can learn from who annoys you and why they annoy you. And there's also a lot to learn from who you admire and why you admire them, which is why we're talking about that also. So what does this have to do with productivity though? So the thing is, anytime we're spending a lot of energy on anything, it affects how we're showing up in the rest of our lives. So if you are spending a lot of energy being annoyed or ticked off with someone, then if you can identify, what's kind of going on there so that you can not feel as annoyed or ticked off, then that's going to show up in how you are showing up in other places of your life. And let's see, Mary says, yes, yeah, Mary, absolutely. So, let's see, where was I? On the flip side, if you can feel that gratitude, that excitement for people that you really admire, then you can have that energy. You can get some of that energy back. And again, that admiration, that positive juju that you get, that will show up in other places of your life too. So it's important to know kind of what's going on there. It can be helpful to know what's going on there too. So to start, let's talk about being annoyed or bothered by someone. So again, think of those 3 people who just, hey Stacy, who really annoy you, who really bother you, who kind of just tick you off. You don't have to share them, but just think about them. And think about why each person annoys or bothers you. Think of a specific instance where, you were kind of like ticked off with them or just like, oh, this again. Think of that specific instance. And generally, when somebody really annoys or bothers you, it's one of about three things. It's because there's a core value that we have that is not being honored, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally. they're doing something that we do or something that we used to do that we judge in ourselves as bad, so we judge it in other people as being bad, or they have something we want and we don't have yet. And it could be, something physical, or it could be emotional, like just the way that they are, or it could be something else. So let's go into some examples. So going against a core value. So if someone values clarity and they're talking with or interacting with somebody who's just not very clear in their communication or in what they want or how they talk about what they do, we might find ourselves annoyed with them. If we're somebody that really values clarity, we might be like, why don't they have this stuff figured out? Like, what's going on with them? So what is that value for you that maybe isn't being represented there? Also, maybe one of your core values is fairness. So you might be really annoyed with somebody who's cutting in line or talking out of turn. Or if you value fairness, you might find yourself really annoyed with somebody or ticked off with somebody or just bothered by somebody who started their business about the same time or even after you, and you perceive them as having more success than you. And, that might not seem fair because you've been doing it longer. So if you value fairness, that's one of the ways that might show up. So think about, what is it about the situation that bothers you? Where might you have a value that isn't showing up in that person or in that situation, or showing up in a way that bothers you, again, with the clarity and the not having clarity thing. And for doing something that, you used to do or you currently do that you're judging as bad, maybe, in the 80s you had big 80s hair and you look at those pictures of yourself from the 80s and you're like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Like, that's horrible. How did I ever go through part of the decade with my hair looking like that? And then maybe you're walking in the mall or you're walking along somewhere and you see someone else, currently who has that big 80s hair, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that is so tacky, right? You're just maybe really annoyed or bothered by it. And it's because you have a judgment around, that big 80s hair that you're now projecting on that other person. And so just be aware of that. When is that popping up? Maybe another example might be if you are always late for things and you just feel so bad about it. You just feel terrible that you're making people wait for you. Or maybe that's something that you used to do that you've changed about, what you're doing. So anytime anyone's late, like, it really bothers you because you have a judgment around being late is bad. And so just recognize that for what it is. And then the last one here is for something, maybe it really bothers you because they have something you want and you don't have yet. So maybe you've always wanted a red convertible, and all of a sudden you know somebody, an acquaintance that has a red convertible, and out of nowhere, like, you're just really annoyed with them, right? There's just somebody that you're really annoyed with, and you're not really sure, why anymore, but it's because you've always wanted that red convertible and now this person has it and you don't have one, and it just really bothers you. Or maybe there's somebody that, you just don't understand how they have just this voice that just grates on you. And you're like, I don't understand how they are so successful with their business when no one should be able to listen to them because their voice is so annoying. And maybe what's really going on there is you are jealous of some of the success that they're having. And so, every little thing just kind of gets on your last nerve with them. So go back to your list of people, the people that really annoy or bother you, or the situations that you find yourself in sometimes that really just annoy or bother you. And just notice, which category do they fall into? Is it something where there's a value that you have that isn't in that situation and that's why it bothers you? Is it that, now I'm trying to remember what they are. Is it something that you do or you used to do that you have a judgment around and that's why it bothers you? Or is it something, maybe more like jealousy? Is that what's happening? So what can you do with this insight? So here I would love to know what your thoughts are. So if you want to share in the comment, I'm pointing to my screen, like you can see where the comments are on my screen. So for you, they're probably below. So if you want to comment below and share what you might do with this new insight, as you're looking at it and you're like, oh, that person really bothers me because I really value family, and this person always seems to encroach on my family time or not seem to think that, my kid's soccer game is a valid excuse to, not make that meeting. And that's what really bothers me about it. What can you do with that information, right? So, oh yeah, Mary says she finds she usually gets irritated with people who have weaknesses that I'm trying to work on. Right. So there's it's that last piece, right? It's that or the second piece rather, where it's something that you've noticed in yourself and you're judging it as something that should be improved. And so you notice when other people aren't doing it as well. I know I do that too, where I, learn something in my business and I'm working on it, and then I notice, oh, this person's doing it really well. That's really cool. Or this person's not doing it really well. They should really, do a better job on that, right? And so then for me, in my court, what am I going to do with that? I can just notice it and say, okay, this is why I'm noticing it. And that person who's not doing it as well, they're just probably not there yet, and let it go. And then I could also this will go into, the people that we admire. For the person who's doing it really well, I might ask them, hey, how did you learn to do that? How did you get so good about doing whatever it is? And learning from them so that I can better myself. There was something else I was just going to share about that left my head. If it comes back, I'll share it with you. So some other things that you might do is you might change, as you notice some of these things, you might change the way that you interact with somebody. So for example, using that clarity example, if you really value clarity and you have a friend who doesn't have that value, instead of waiting for them to, share all of the details for whatever, you might just be a little more proactive and know that if you want to have that clarity around the interaction or around the meeting or around whatever it is, that you just need to ask them so that they can provide, whatever information that you're missing, where with somebody else who might also share that value, they might share that right up front. They might share those details right up front, while somebody who one of their core values isn't clarity, they just might not think to do that. So it might just mean being a little bit more proactive on your account so that you don't find yourself annoyed or bothered. It might be something that you work, if you have a coach, that you might work with your coach on and just say, hey, I have this situation that comes up and I'm not sure what I want to do with it, or I'm not even sure what's really bothering me here. Can we walk through or talk through this situation? You might journal about it. And you might even just decide that you're going to have a different reaction when you notice that it's happening. So be gentle with yourself. So maybe you might decide, hey, when I notice that I'm really getting irritated about XYZ situation, I'm just going to take a step back and notice that that's what's going on, and decide not to react to it, or even just laugh at myself a little bit because it's like, oh look, falling into that pattern again. Isn't that hilarious? And laugh about it and then move on and find something else to do. And sometimes when you are able to pinpoint what it is about that person or situation that's really bothering you, sometimes just having that awareness is really all that it takes to shift that energy around that situation or around that person. So be open for that too. And I'm going I post all of my Facebook Lives on my website. And so for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post underneath the video just what these things are so that it's just there in one spot. So if you want to go back to it and just get the Cliff Notes version, so to speak, that will be there. And then you can, of course, listen to the video for all of the details again later if you want. So yes, I saw Stacy, you said me too about the getting irritated with people, you know, and all of that. Yes, it's very common. So let's talk about admiration. So we talked about it just a little bit. So look at your list or create a quick list or think about the people that you really admire. Who are the people that you look at and you're like, oh, they just do that so great, or I really admire them, or I kind of wish I could be that person when I grow up. Or as Mary said, you know, you could even think that about somebody who is biologically younger than you, where you're like, yeah, you know, they're 18, but they really got like this thing that they really have figured out, and I really admire that about them. So who are those people, you know, in your life, or what are the situations that you notice that you really tend to admire in that situation? So think about what is it about them or about the situation that you really admire. And if it's a person, try to think of maybe a specific situation where involving that person where you just really admired them or wished you could be them, or, you know, any of that. And as you're thinking about that, here's, let's see, 3 things that when we admire somebody, generally these are some of the reasons why. So one is there's the shared value. So they are really exemplifying a value that is just one of your core values, and it's probably one of their core values too. And they're doing such a good job at, you know, sharing that value that you just really admire it. It's something that we do well, or as we mentioned in the chat here, something that you're working on in yourself, and so you notice when somebody else is really also doing it well or excelling at that thing. And sometimes, and this kind of goes with that one, sometimes it's something that we wish we could do. So we see something someone else is doing and we're like, oh, that is so cool. I wish I could do that. And spoiler alert here, if there's something that you really wish you could do that somebody else is doing, because you see that in them, there's probably that seed of ability, of skill in you too, because you are able to recognize it. And you wouldn't be able to recognize it with such clarity if it wasn't something that already had some sort of a seed planted in you for. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. So now let's go into examples for each of those. So again, for the shared values, using clarity as an example, you might really admire somebody, you know, if clarity is one of your core values, you might really admire somebody who is very clear when they're sharing next steps or when discussing what they do. Again, using fairness as an example, you might really admire somebody who skillfully enforces or follows the rules, because, you know, you have that you might both have that fairness value happening there. And, you know, maybe you really admire that single mom who goes to all of the soccer games of her kids, you know, and gives up other things happening in her life so she can be at those soccer games. And that might be because you have a core value of family, and you see in that situation how that value of family is just so honored in that situation that you just might really admire her for that. So again, that's the core values that really line up, or there's a situation that happens where one of your core values is really like exemplified, right? And so you really admire that situation. Now for something we do well, the example here that I wrote, hey Darla, the example here that I wrote is, if you've, and it goes with what Mary had said earlier, if you've recently mastered something, you might really admire or really appreciate other people who have also mastered it or are even like a level or two above you. And for something you wish you could do, and I'm gonna pause here for a second because I see that Darla Ledoux joined us here in the comments, and I just want to give a little bit of credit because one of the very first coaches that I worked with was actually Darla. And I remember her talking about these sorts of things, and it's really just something that stuck with me. So I just want to give a quick shout out to Darla. So if you see her there in the comments or want to go and check her out, she's really fabulous. So you can go and check her out. So anyway, if it's something that you wish you could do, then the cool thing is, you probably have that seed of it in here. It's probably something that has that seed planted that you can do. And that's what allows you to really see how well the other people are doing with it. So maybe you really admire the public speaking ability that somebody else has. And you're like, oh, I could never do that. Well, the cool thing is because you see that in them, if you do some work on it, you can probably also be, a really great public speaker. Maybe you go getting into the what can you do with this information. Maybe you go and you ask them, hey, what would you recommend for somebody who wants to get really comfortable with public speaking or improve their public speaking so that they can impart a bit of that wisdom with you. Now, on the flip side, though, maybe you really admire an Olympian, and part of you just is like, oh, it would be so cool to, be in the Olympics and do X, Y, Z. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be, the next figure skating gold medalist or downhill skiing champ. But it might mean that you have a core value around commitment or excellence or achievement, and you see those values in those Olympians and you really admire that about them. So another example somebody shared with me one time was around marathon runners, where maybe you really admire marathon runners, but you've had a couple of knee replacements. Maybe you really value health and athleticism, and you see that in those marathon runners. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to become a marathon runner, but you see those things in them that you really value. So it's really a value thing and not this is something that you want to pursue as a course of action. So kind of look at those things and discern which one is going on for you. So again, going back to the question I asked before, what is it about the people that you really admire? Like, which category does it fall into? And just kind of think about that. And again, share, what do you think you can do with that information? Once you know which category the people you admire, the situations that you admire falls into, what might you do with that information? What might be a next step for you? So share those in the comments. As I'm waiting for you to finish typing those things, I'll share a couple of things that I wrote down. One of the things might be you realize you have a value, like you realize a core value that you have that you didn't realize before. And that can be super helpful in your life and in your business when you realize you have certain core values. So maybe you realize you have a value around achievement that you didn't realize you had before. So then you can maybe change the way that you do things a little bit, or do things with an eye on what is the achievement here, so that you can really meet that core value or honor that core value for yourself in a way that maybe you haven't been doing before. You might notice that you just really want to learn about something, right? You notice that this person does this thing really well, like the public speaking. So you might notice that and say, maybe that's something that I want to pursue. And you might just realize that that person's really cool and you really admire them and you want to spend more time with them because there's so many different things that you admire about them, that they fall into a bunch of different categories. So you might want to spend more time with them so you can really benefit from the wisdom and the values and whatever it is that you share that you want more of. All right. So if anybody has any questions around any of this, I'd really love to know. And you can type them in the comments and I'll respond if you're on the recording or if I don't see them right away here. So now the topic today was every time you're annoyed, focus on this. So here's what I want you to do. Anytime you really find yourself annoyed, think about what is it about that person, that situation that is really bothering you. And do the same thing when you're admiring somebody. Just notice, what is it about them that I really admire? Like, what of those 3 things is it that's happening for me right now? And again, on the blog, I will share a quick cheat sheet that kind of lists some of these things out. So you don't have to, watch all of the video again and try to remember to take notes. I'll have that there. And I'll include that link in the description once I have that all done. So before I end today, I have one last question for you. And that is, how are you doing with your intentions and your goals for March? So we are entering next week, the last week of March. And with that, I'm wondering, how are you doing on your goals? Are you on track? Everything's going well and you don't have to worry about it? You're going to meet all those goals? Great. Or are you feeling a little bit behind where you're like, things kind of went off the rails. I don't even remember what those goals were that I set at the beginning of the month. I don't know what the progress is that I've been having. And you want to change that? Then I invite you to join us for the Unnamed Productivity Club. Next week, Thursday, we are doing a planning party where we're going to map out your April. So if you had the best of intentions for March, but it didn't quite plan out the way you want to and you want April to be different, then this is where you're going to want to be. So you can join me and the other ladies of the Unnamed Productivity Club, there we go, for the planning party, and I'll guide you through setting your intentions and your goals for April. And right now, it's only joining the club is only $17, and the price will go up. I haven't picked the exact time yet, but the price will be going up on that in the next month or 2. So join us, join the Productivity Club, the Unnamed Productivity Club, for the planning party, and then stay with us for the accountability that happens through the rest of the month. And I think that's it for this week's Wednesday Live with Evie, where we talked about annoyance and admiration. So I'd love to know what tidbit you're taking away from today's video that you think is going to be really helpful as you go throughout the rest of the week and the rest of the month. So until next week, much love. Bye.